present my slideshow and my book here is a big deal for me. So I'm honored to be here. All right. The first couple slides sort of set everything up for what you're going to see beyond this. This is in northern Spain on the Camino de Santiago, which runs from the Pyrenees on the French side of the Pyrenees all the way to the Atlantic Ocean in Finisterre, which is considered the end of the land, where the ancients believed that that's where the earth dropped off into nowhere, and that was in the 1200s before Columbus eventually went over. So this is somewhere halfway on that 500-mile route. This is on the Walk Across America for Diabetes, which was from 1997 to 1999. And this is near the beginning. It's about 3 days in from the Pacific coast north of Seattle in the North Cascades. And that's my oldest daughter, Adrian, and she was with me a lot during this walk. This is in Arizona, down south of Tucson, and it is at a place where there was a school for the Indian children run by the nuns. So it was a Lutheran, it was a Catholic mission, and we were there. I was actually married. Do you see yourself in that picture at all? My friend Marion joined me here, but I was there a day early, so I think I was there that day, and you came in later that day or the next day. Which there's a comical part when she arrives in the book, and I'm going to read that part later, so we'll just keep that in mind. Okay. And this is the coast of Oregon, somewhere right around the middle of Oregon, which might have been one of my most favorite places I've been to in my lifetime. And this was sort of typical of what it looked like every day, walking on those roads and trails and beaches. And these are the spider towers in the north corner near the Four Corners in Arizona, and on the reservation there for the Navajo reservation. We spent a lot of time with the Navajos over the years, and me and my younger brother Craig were there for that. We climbed up to a spot we could view them, and then later we crossed and went down in the canyon and came out at the base of them. They don't let everyone do that, but because we were doing diabetes programs for the tribe, they allowed us to go down in there. This is in Utah, a Wilson Arch, and there's the newer motorhome. We went through 2 motorhomes of 4 years, and then we used this one about 10 years, even beyond when I was on the road with it. We would still make appearances at diabetes conferences and walkathons and things like that. But this was the second one. Okay, that's my buddy Johnny Knapp. When you read the book, he's the whole middle section. John Knapp from the Maxitoni Knapp farm, the hay farm out there. And he was with me, did 90% of the driving during those 9 years. And yeah, so you'll read about him a lot. This is the Grand Coulee Dam in Washington. This is actually near Alamogordo, near in New Mexico, where the palm was invented, somewhere in around those areas. This is Great Sands. That's my daughter, my oldest daughter, and you can see the reflection. There was a light shower, just enough to make those pools in that you could get the reflection. Starting from the left, the third one in, that's my daughter, and then there's me. And this was on the San Carlos Apache Reservation in New Mexico. This is in northern Idaho on, I can't think of the name of the lake, but it's in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho. That is not us. We just shot them as they paddled by. We were on foot. I'm actually going to read a passage about this photo. It was at a big powwow in central Washington, the first year of the Walk Across America. And that's Dan, the Indian's name is Dan, and he's the one that, he was one of the best dancers in the whole Pacific Northwest, which encompassed a lot of Canada. And he actually taught me how to dance for power. I still wasn't very good at it, but I'll read the passage. This would be nice to have that video. And this is all the way down in southern Texas, where we jumped a bicycle to go across because Texas is 1,000 miles from El Paso to the Gulf Coast. And it would have taken me a whole year just to walk across one section of a year, about 2 months to walk across it. But by using bicycle, we were able to go from there all the way to St. Augustine on the Florida coast in that same 2-month period. My friend Tina, she's joined me on a lot of adventures, and she was my crew chief during the adventure of the Walk Across America for Diabetes. You'll also hear her story in the book, I think in one of them that I'm going to read maybe. Okay. This is New Orleans, along the Mississippi River. My daughter, this guy taught her how to play drums on a 5-gallon drum. This is the northern coast of California, up near Trinity, where these rock formations, you see a lot of that on the whole Washington, Oregon, and northern California coast. Okay, this is the highest point in Texas, Guadalupe Mountains, about 8,500 feet. El Paso is just maybe 50 miles to the west of here, and I was just ready to start. I really wanted to climb the mountain, but we did not have the time. I was, as the book states, I got off the bike and jumped into the motorhome 50 miles to the south, and I would ride, and he would ride back to meet me. He also had a bicycle with him at the time, and then we would turn around and ride together. And he, I remember before he pulled off, I took a look at the road I was going to ride on. It was a dirt road. There was nobody around, nothing. I didn't see an animal. Yeah, and it was like, I thought it was the longest dirt road I ever saw. And that was the way I was going. So, yeah. But that was East Texas. It was beautiful, but so barren a lot of times. This is the Navajo Reservation, the children's school where we did this. We had a puppet show that did the same thing that we would do for the grown-ups. We would also put in a puppet show and have a lot of animals that we met along the way over different species, and then a little bit of a diabetes message, which was difficult with kids describing that. But diabetes is rampant on most of the reservations, especially in the desert southwest of the country, Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. This is up the highest point of the Walk Across America was Logan Pass, Montana, in Quaker National Park. My daughter, Adrian, and my friend Lynette. My dad on the left, and my father-in-law on the right. I'm going to read a passage about them today. And they both, it was very interesting having them along. They were in their early 70s. And but also it was a challenge. It was a little difficult. I ended up walking alone a lot, but they would sometimes walk a mile with me, but they would always have a little bit of trouble route finding so that I would walk to where they were supposed to be. Yeah, it was a challenge, but very rewarding in the long run. And this is in Big Sur on the California coast, Central California, south of San Francisco. A rainbow over the Badlands, that is in South Dakota. Okay, now, when I got to Atlantic City, New Jersey, after walking across America, I did that in 3 years, 2 months, 2 months, and 2 months. And I got to Atlantic City, and it happened to be that Nicole Johnson had won the Miss America pageant the year before. She was also type 1 diabetic. She also had a insulin pump and was sponsored by the insulin pump company who sponsored me. So we arranged for her to come back to Atlantic City, where she actually had been crowned the year, probably about 7 or 8 months before that. And she said, well, I'm going to come here, I'm going to crown Mom. Yeah, and the crown, and which I still have at home in a box. It's made out of insulin pump composite. So that was pretty wild. And we walked the last 2 miles from here, made the speeches, and we walked right up to where the convention center where she had accepted Miss America was 1999. And we talked about diabetes the whole 2 miles. Shock, with diabetics, talking about how difficult it is, but how many advantages are coming up in the future, which we now have. Okay. This is a real quickie. In fact, you can flip through that real quick. This is some of my spirituality. What I have learned over the years of walking and with different cultures and that. But some of this stuff, I've always been a big fan of the Gnostic Gospel. Ted Kerouac introduced me to Buddhism. A quote from Kerouac, the holy contour of life. The Dalai Lama, who I met at Lehigh University a few years ago, also further my interest in Buddhism. The world will be saved by the Western woman. Now that's something big. Thoreau, the kind of crusade preached by some Peter the Hermit in us, to go forth and reconquer this holy land from the hands of the infidels, which was the Crusades in Europe. And then Ralph Waldo Emerson, buddy, the purpose of life is not to be happy, to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to make some difference that you have lived and lived well. And Thomas Merton, he was a monk, a Franciscan monk, and lived in Kentucky. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and God is shining through it all the time. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he was one of my biggest heroes and someone that I look to all the time. The 1930s, he was a monk, a Catholic monk, and he traveled the world because he was also a paleontologist. So he went into the deserts of Africa and the Gobi Desert, spent many, many years in the Gobi Desert, and looked for dinosaur bones, and he found the skull of a Peking man, and his friend was the top sculptor in the U.S. at the time. He brought her along to make busts of everything in case they would lose them or they deteriorate. So what he represented for me was that merger of spirituality and science to show that it could be done. Of course, the church excommunicated him because of that. But now we know how important that merger is. And so he's always been one of my heroes. And that's him also in the Gobi. Love is a sacred reserve of energy. It is like the blood of spiritual evolution. And this was my pastor years ago, who I was a deacon under at Rival Lutheran Church, Pastor Pottiker. And that was our current pastor when I put this slideshow together, but now she has retired also. And Pastor Jimmy Worley from Maxatawny Church, who's always been another one, he was with me on my walk across America, or on the adventure on the rim of America. And he's, so he's always, and he's still my go-to if I have a problem with theology, which I read about it, and then I'll call him up, or we'll get together and do a walk, and he'll help me straighten it out. And sometimes I even help him with a few things. The first year, the walk across Spain started right here after coming over the Pyrenees in Roncesvalles. This is where, so you can see that to get to Santiago de Compostela, which is the third holiest city to to Christians in the world after Rome and Jerusalem. And this is where we're walking. Now that's kilometers, 790 kilometers, about 500 miles. And my youngest daughter is now with me, and her friend from Penn State, her roommate, they came at the very beginning. And there was 5 years between my two daughters. My oldest daughter was with me on all that stuff around America. And I always wondered, how will I ever duplicate this with Amberly? And then when I was having some bad times after the whole walk around America was over, I went through some more health problems that not related to diabetes either. And I didn't know if this was all I would get. I did an amazing thing and I had these wonderful adventures. Is that it? You know, is it over? And a lot of friends who had diabetes around the same time I did were either passing on or losing their legs, losing their eyesight, kidney dialysis, kidney transplants. It was just a complete mess. And I think, maybe this is all I get. My kids set me down and told me, that is complete bullshit. That's not you. This is not you. You are someone who rises. You're always rising above. You gotta do something. You gotta find a new adventure. You gotta make a list. You gotta make a pack for it. You get an esprit de corps, as the French call it, a group of people to back you and go with you, like I always did on the other adventures. And she said, I'll go with you. That probably saved my life. And so this is the beginning of that portion of my life. And I'm still here and still going. So yeah, both my daughters, and my wife was in on that too. She sometimes was a little bit more skeptical about, well, let him stay home for a while. No, Mom, he's got to get back out there. This is where he thrives. Right. This is during a rainstorm in one of the typical villages in Montjardin. I think the castle on the hill there. It's a bit in ruins, that castle. I usually end up walking up there at the end of the day if I have any energy left, because I always want to see that. Sometimes there's even some old battlements laying around there from how many thousand years ago. But it's worth the little bit more energy to get up there. This is in top of right outside Pamplona, Spain. So this is about 5 days into it from the Pyrenees. And there's another mountain you go up. And you can see a little bit of snow here on some of the peaks. This is in April, or end of March, early April. This translates into, and you can see the windmills. It's always windy up there, so that's why they built the windmills there. Where the path of the wind crosses with that, where the wind crosses with that of the stars. Yeah, and don't ask me to do the Spanish part. I know it, but I get mixed up. Okay, and then this is also my same gang that first year in Spain. This is interesting. There's a wine fountain, and you can fill your bottle with wine anytime of the day or night. The problem is, about a mile in from the morning, from the village of Estella, and most pilgrims pass it that early. You don't want to be drinking wine at 8:30 in the morning when you've got a long walk ahead of you. So we fill our bottles and tasted it. It's really good stuff. As the Spanish stuff is. But it was just not something we were going to drink a whole bottle of walking. You need to hydrate. You need to drink water. So, yeah, and also, Lauren was my daughter's roommate at Penn State, also brought her boyfriend with Brigham. And they both live in New Jersey now. This is one of the many cathedrals that you'll find along the route in Spain. This is a Gothic church in Burgos. Same crew again. That little village there, Siriki, and you see it from afar, coming in from the backside there, and you can't wait to get up. You go up the switchbacks to it, and up at the top it's pretty, like a lot of crumbling buildings, one little church, one little store that's barely open, and so there's not really much to see. But after you come back down the other side, you keep turning around because the visual of that village is just incredible. So it's just a little letdown when you get up to it. So yeah, and that's Lauren on top of the same windmill mountain there. Yeah, little micro. I was not going to try that, by the way. And this is a section called the Meseta. It's the Spanish desert, and it's very remote. And for 8 days you walk across it. And you know what? I won't say a more word about it because I'm going to read a section about it. It's a very unique portion, and the first town down there at the bottom is called Hontanes. This is getting near the end. Now we're only got about a week to go to get to Santiago, and we cross this long bridge over this lake. This is on top of some of the mountains in central, the central part of the route, so it's north central. The Picos de Europa, the Cantabrian Mountains, I think a little further to the north and over might be the Asturian Mountains. But they're all, sometimes in the May, you'll still have whitecaps. This is a little village, I can't even remember the name now, but it's near the start of the walk. Oh, I know, that bridge, you walk over that bridge, it was there for centuries, and supposedly it was a healing bridge. If you walked over there with an ailment, it would help you when you got to the other side. But I have so many ailments, I thought, I hope this bridge don't crumble when this is a freak snowstorm we had up in Galicia about 8 days before the finish of the walk. We had about 3 inches of snow that day, and we were getting near the end of April, like almost into May, and it came out of, during the night, about 3 inches of snow, and the wind howled all day, and it pretty much sums up how tough it was. But everyone pulled together, all the people from around the world, and we all got ourselves safely down the mountain. And there you can see it's starting to melt there a little bit, and it's getting easier as we're getting further down. It's another one of the castles. This one, Gaudí, he's famous for this kind of stuff all over Spain, and he designed that castle. And it's in a city called Astorga. It's a walled city all the way around. You get up, you go up ramparts into the city, and then you can walk up there all around. It's one of my favorite places in the world. That's also Astorga. It's a different cathedral there now. They're just all over the place in this little town. It's not that big. And it's got a beautiful plaza where everyone sits out, and at night they dance there, the kids play soccer. It's just amazing, just the humanity that you see there, and it's like an every night thing. And some of the vineyards in Rioja, which is over towards the French border, closer to the French border. But what's amazing about these vineyards and olive groves and stuff, is some of the best wine. I've never really drank wine that much before I went to Europe, and I had a few sips of this stuff from Rioja. That's what I get all the time. And if anyone was at my reading on Monday night at Firefly, we actually had a bottle of French wine and a bottle of Spanish wine. We had a bottle of Rioja, so everyone got a little taste of that. This is one of the high points of the entire route, and it's up there in the Cantabrian Mountains. And this cross is Cruz de Ferro, is the Spanish name of it. And on this, you're supposed to bring a little rock from back home, and then you throw it on that pile. And over the years, this Now it just keeps getting bigger. And you're supposed to bring it with the idea that some of that represents some of your burdens. You're supposed to leave your burden behind here by throwing the rock on that pile and walking away from it and leave that burden behind. So it's a lot of spiritual significance there. This is another castle, a Knights Templar castle in Ponferrada, Spain. You're about three-quarters of the way across Spain at that time, Ponferrada. And this is getting very near the end. I think that girl was from Mexico. And this is, after you get to Santiago, you can continue on to the ocean for 3 or 4 days of walking. This is the first day's walk to this village. There's only 3 miles left to the finish at this point, and the Pope had come to visit this area years earlier, and they built that for him. On top of that village, on top of that mountain, you can see the Cathedral in Santiago, and know that that's where you're going in another 3 miles. This is the cathedral at Santiago, and once again, 3,000 feet high. The towers built around I think it was this 1200s maybe, and just an amazing piece of architecture and as much spiritual significance as you can almost get. Yeah. This is the finish at the end in the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. Oftentimes when I'm at the Jersey shores, I'll look over across the ocean and think that I'm looking 3,000 miles across and looking at this area where I finished that first year. This is also that same village. It's a fishing village, and Muxia, M-U-X-I-A. Walking along it to finish there, which is the village at the other end, takes a day. Some people do it in 2 days. Walking about 30 kilometers, which is about 20 miles. There's some of you're up on these cliffs, looking down at the beach a lot of times. Pretty wild. But now this is at Finisterre. This is finish of land. It translates into the end of the world. There I'm about half a mile from the end of the world. And this here represents why my pack is so much heavier than the average person. All those things laid out there represent 8 pounds. So if a normal person in Spain carries between 12 and 16 pounds, my pack is 24, because 8 of those are all the different things that I need to control my diabetes, to monitor it, to adjust it, to change the insulin pump, now a continuous glucose monitor. But these are all the things that keep me going, and and I am a bigger guy, so carrying that extra weight isn't as big a deal as it would be for someone else. But that's representative of the weight, the burden I carry. These are examples of me doing my the old way. I used to just take a bit of blood out my finger and put it into a meter to get my blood sugar reading, and then I adjust it. You can probably shoot through those. I think there's a few of them. Yeah, and you can just go right through those. They're all just representative of that. Yeah. Now, this is me changing my insulin pump. So you can probably shoot through those too. I won't go into any details. Drawing the syringe out of the insulin into the reservoir, and then I'm pumping it through the tubing, adjusting it to my stomach, to the subcutaneous fat of the stomach, and then that. When I do this, and there's this also, you can see where we sleep at night in the pump beds, how close together they are. And but sometimes when I do this, changing my insulin pump, in case you're wondering what's going on over here. You're more than welcome to watch. Occasionally, some people who are nosy enough that'll go over it. A lot of times, those people then become my friend. Even maybe a few days further down the road, we'll talk, they'll ask me questions about it, and their curiosity also became part of the friendship. Now, this is in France. The second year I walked across France, and the trail there is called the GR65. The Grand Ronde is I think that the French term for the trail, and but it's all eventually leads towards Santiago. Now I'm another 500 kilometers beyond, or 500 miles, 800 kilometers on the other side of the Pyrenees. My youngest daughter, now the second year, she's been with me every year since. And this is where we started in La Puy-en-Velay. And I had a crew there from North Carolina. I become one of my best buddies from Belgium, a friend from Australia, a friend from Mexico, and I had met them all the year before, and we all got together. So let's do France. This is what became of that. And this is the steps where it actually starts the trail. And there's my daughter. La Puy-en-Velay has 7 mounds. These translate into mounds, and they're like steep hills, and they rise up all over that whole part of what they call the Massif Central. And there's a cathedral on top of one of them. There's statues on some of the others. It's like a fairy tale land. It's quite amazing. When you read my book, I get off the bus, and I'm really sick, as is everyone on the bus, because the driver drove like a madman. And we all were sick, and I had a lot of problems with blood sugar was high. I came out, and I looked up and saw this. And I said, wow, I suddenly don't feel that sick anymore. Though I still was. But you'll read about that. Rained a lot in France. It was spring. I found out later that that's just the way it is. It does a lot of mud. My daughter always had to interact with the animals, no matter what they were. I think she even speaks their language. Some desolate parts of France, lingering snow. There are the Pyrenees rising up. Typical rest stop in one of the little villages in France. The trail, very typical. Sometimes the mud was so bad it felt like you were walking on platform shoes. And if you go to clean it off, you take about a couple of minutes to do that. Another few feet down the trail, you're fully in it. Like you didn't even bother. Another village in France. There's another castle. I went up to that one too the next morning. Up there, there were actual battles thrown about. It was quite impressive. The castle itself was crumbled, but the name of the village there is Espalion. There's the castle. And there's some of the ramparts. You can see some of the battlements. And that's still part of that same village, Espalion. I think it was Amerly's favorite too. One of my favorite places in the world. Getting closer to that's leaving the village now, going away from the castle. Another big cathedral there, probably a day's walk from Espalion. Crosses everywhere in France, and also a lot of Joan of Arc statues, which I'm going to read a section of for that. I don't know if I have any. You're not always supposed to shoot the inside of the churches, but sometimes I snuck one, but I'm not sure if I have a Joan of Arc on here. Typical trail now. It's getting a little more into springtime and warming up a little bit, and wildflowers come out. It's pretty impressive. across the rest of France. Conques, a very significant spiritual site, and I stayed with the nuns there. They gave me a free bunk bed, they gave me a breakfast the next morning, they gave me dinner the night before. They said, all you gotta do is you gotta wash dishes, you gotta set the table, and you gotta go to mass. And they said, and tonight we're gonna ask you especially, since it's, I think it was Lent, the start of Lent. And they said, we are going to ask you to read one of the lessons in English, which I did in Florence, so I thought that was special. There's your mud. That's a typical day. Yeah, fun. Yeah, that's what it looks like. There's Gilmore, yeah. Sometimes, I don't know if you can see the blood dripping off her sword, at least it wasn't quite clear enough. I sort of became obsessed with Gilmore while walking across it, but once again, that's in the book. This is a bridge leading out of Cahors, another one of my favorite cities in the world. And the river Lot encircles it almost like a horseshoe. So it's got all these amazing bridges going across this river. And I'm leaving in a week and a half, and I'm starting actually in Cahors and walking up and over the Pyrenees again to duplicate something that I've done before. But I'm going to be able to spend a day here wandering around before I start the next day. And there's a big climb. As soon as you get to the other end of the bridge, up through to the mountain, and then the vista back of the city is quite impressive. But yeah, there it is. I did it at sunrise. I had an Australian buddy that was walking with me. He was like 18 years old. He was fluent in French because he had grown up in France and then moved with his family to Australia. So he came with a good buddy because he could translate for me. But he said, yeah, we gotta get up really early, and even though we'd be tired, and that was worth it for that. Yeah. The city of Moissac, another spiritually significant point on the route in France. Once again, it's raining. This is the village of Alvear, which is sort of storybook, the way it sits up there, and there's a wall, and once again in front there, that you can walk on the ramparts. The river Lot is right below, down in here, out of the view of the camera. Another castle off to there was a time when I was walking, and we'd get hold of my wife at the end of the day, and she'd see some of my pictures. She said, sometimes it's green like that in the spring, the trees look the same. It looks like at home. Why are you walking over there where it's just going to look like that?
So the reason I said, because every day I see one or two of these.
Yeah.
When you go to the
Big castle, and you go into
yeah.
We're the same, but also different. Because my path, you carry a shell that identifies you as a pilgrim. That's what gets you to be able to stay in the lodging specifically for pilgrims.
Where do you get the shells?
You can pick it up at the beginning, at the start of the walk, whatever. They sell them everywhere. Yeah, and it's usually real light, and it sort of represents. First of all, there's a Knights Templar cross on there. So a lot of this area you're walking through were preserved and protected by the Knights Templar, which is another whole story and another book. I go into it a little bit in my book. Sort of also got a little bit of a thing with the Knights Templar that I'm really interested in that. But the other thing it represents is in Europe, these trails all exist, and they all come together. They all eventually integrate, and this shell represents Santiago, and then all the trails, the spider web of trails, all comes to Santiago. And this is since the 1400s. Another big, typical cathedral along the way in France. I'm getting slowly closer and closer to the Pyrenees now. And this is about the only traffic jam you get over there. But it happens almost once a day. You gotta get off to the side. It's sheep, Sometimes it's cows, steers, just goats. But this one happened to be sheep. Inside of one of the old cathedrals that now have been converted to sleeping quarters. We actually slept in that room. Now, that's pretty holy. Yeah. And now there are the Pyrenees. I'm actually up on top of them at this point. Yeah, in the wind and pretty happy that I'm soon through because people do die up on top there in freak snowstorms and fall, and some of the trails are right on, there's an edge. So, yeah, I'm probably pretty happy when there. And now we're jumping ahead all the way to Portugal. I walked up from Lisbon to Santiago again. That's about 600 kilometers, so it was about 400 miles. My daughter was with me again on that one. There she is in one of the Portuguese cities. I think, Tui. It was quite amazing. All the places in Portugal are pretty magical. Yeah, there's a bridge. We're on a bridge crossing the river here, going from Portugal into Spain. And that's the castle on the hill there. That's Tui there also. Yeah, that is where we enter. We enter into Spain now, and then it reverts back to the yellow arrows that you follow. España. Yeah. Very mountainous in northern Portugal, and then that part even of Spain, very hilly, and yes, it was a lot up and down. Takes a lot of energy. Typical bridge, a lot of rivers, crossing rivers on big bridges. Another fort up there. Another cathedral at the base of the mountain, and we had to go up that mountain. This was on Easter Sunday. Barcelos was the name of the town. So we were eating, I think a couple parades went by us while we were eating there. Very festive. It's one of my best shots again that I've ever taken. It's in Barcelos on Easter Sunday, and my daughter had no idea I was shooting it, which makes it even better. It's not posed, and they had laid out this blue carpet. That's just it just makes me think of the adventure that whole trip was. Yeah, another cathedral in Porto, Portugal. That's about a halfway point from Lisbon, Porto, and then Santiago. And Porto may be my favorite big city in the world. Yeah, I was so blown away by Porto, and maybe you'll see it if you go from Porto you walk 6 miles east and you hit the Atlantic, and then you follow the Atlantic for a few days. So there might be some more some more Porto pictures there, I'm sure. I don't know why I was, there's Porto at night, full moon. We're sitting down along the river. There's a whole bunch of restaurants, nightclubs. Across the river, there's wine cellars dug out, port wine cellars dug out of the banks. And during the day, there's a big auction there, a big farmer's market, and a law on the outside. That's every day. The weather's pretty much almost perfect in this part of Portugal every day. Yeah. Typical rest stop every few miles. Just sit there and watch the breakers. This is Porto. This is a lot of these statues are the famous explorers that came from Portugal over the years that you probably learn about in history. There's a big bridge. That bridge below is what you enter. When I first entered Porto, I had no idea what to expect. So I came over a little rise on that bridge, and all of a sudden I saw this. And I thought, my God, I've never seen anything like this. And then I took my daughter up. We went up to a church yard up above here, and that puts you even higher yet. So you can see all the way out to the west there. That's the ocean. It's about 6 miles to walk there. one of the cathedrals and castles. This part of Portugal I was alone for about a week, and had some rain, so it was pretty lonely. I just needed a little something foreground for that photo. I put my umbrella down. And another castle in Tomar, Portugal. It was also Knights Templar. I took a half day off of walking that day and just walked the whole castle. It took me half a day. It's just so immense, and you could look through the portal windows when you were up on the ramparts, and that's where they used to shoot the arrows through, and you could see a different part of Tomar. Each time another window was like another magical part of, amazing. Still there's those ramparts, and here are some of the portals that you could look through. Outside at Abbey, once again I spent a lot of times with the nuns at the abbeys. A lot of times if I was alone, at least I wasn't totally lonely. We would go to the mass, and so I was totally comfortable and at home. Now this is up on the northern part of Spain. There's a trailer called the Camino del Norte, and it's another gem of Spain. Very difficult, a lot of wind, a lot of rain, but you're along the Atlantic the whole time. So it's totally different from the rest of Spain. There's my friend from Mexico who walks with me every couple of years, Rebecca. Yep. And then my friend from Belgium, he speaks 5 languages, and he goes with me every year too. We're really good buddies, Carlo. My friends from Boulder, Colorado, Laura on the left is actually from Kutztown, Laura Hutchings. And she's now married, and they met at Penn State. They live in Boulder, Colorado, and they come with me almost every year also. And there's some bad storms there. This is very typical for the Norte. But then the views and that are so amazing that you put up with the bad weather. You're just like, There's Laura coming up one of those climbs. A lot of times it's slip. You lose a half step, you gain a step, and then over and over again. The city of Bilbao, which is one of the most incredible sites also in the world. It's hard to even explain. That's a museum there, and I actually took a half day off and walked all around Bilbao and went in the museum. It was quite amazing. Frank Gehry, I think, designed that museum. Yeah. And up on some of the cliffs again, another typical view from. I think they filmed a couple episodes of Game of Thrones here. It was like a year before we got there, but there's actually some scenes in the movie there that you'll see from this section. This is San Sebastian, up in northern Spain, also one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And Ernest Hemingway used to spend a lot of time there. Here we go again. This time it's a long alpaca. My daughter says she knows the languages of the animals because the language comes from their horn. So, yeah. Yep, there she is again. Another city, little town actually, a beach town. Zurich's Beach, yeah. There's some portions of the Norte where the river comes in and leads in across the town, and you have to take a boat across. And it happens like six times maybe. So maybe every few days, the only way across is, and a lot of times it's a little boat, and there's a guy, usually a big burly bass guy with a big pole, and he pulls you across the inlet. Yeah, so that also adds some to it. But if it's a stormy, windy, rainy day, it can also be a little bit hair-raising. There's the gang again, Laura and Dave and daughter Amberly. And now we're leaving Zarna's Beach and heading up this walk, some of the finest 4 miles I've ever walked on, this whole way along these cliffs, along these railings to the next little village up there. Truly amazing. Another one of those inlets, little beach there. My daughter looking off the distance to see where we're headed. Now these are some of my friends. I think this is all the walks I've done, just concentrating on the friends. My friend Ginny and Sandy it's actually Sandy and Ginny from Australia. They've gone with me a few times since. My friend Lynette, hometown farm girl from Berks County, in the Miss America pageant. This is my French family. So the grandma, the 2 boys, and then the mom. I walked with them for a week, and they would always look for me because I would buy strawberries from the farmers along the way. Little stands out, and they would wait because they put out this spread of food. It's typical French. Every cheese known to man, and they'd be waiting. They said, nothing's complete until we have Bob's strawberries. Every time I had it, one time it was Theo, the older one, was 14, and Hugo, he was 12. They had, it was his birthday. It was Theo's 14th birthday, and they had a big cake, and I came in with my strawberries and put them on the cake. Yeah. This is my buddy, the first year of the first year of my Camino. I walked the last week with him. And there's a story in my book that's truly amazing. This guy was another one of those guys like Johnny now that you can't invent if you're going to write a novel. This guy was big and bold and burst right off the pages. So you'll get a real kick out of reading about Dougie. He was from England. He was a special forces guy, fought in the Falklands War, and just had a million stories. And he was also kind of roguish. He was, and since I'm like really, lightweight, good guy, we were like, we buddies, everyone around us knew it. And said, you two are like the most ridiculous, buddy system, you are totally different. I said, yeah, but he's still fascinating, but he thought the same thing about me, so so we got along. There's quite an interesting story in the book about Dougie. My younger brother, Craig, and this is in Spider Tower. No, this was in Utah, where the Fisher Tower, where the climbers, we were watching the climbers go up and down that thing. Yeah. And my daughter in the middle, and my friend from Mexico, and my friend from Lake Tahoe in France. Julie, Julie Peters from Maxiponi, she was with me when I was doing the bicycle portion of Adventure on the Rim. This is in New Orleans. My friends from North Carolina on the first year on the Camino de Santiago. There's my first year's game, Laura, Raylan, and Emily. And that's my buddy Dave. He's from Langdon, and he's a big rock climber. He goes all over the big walls and that. And he joined me in northern Idaho and part of Montana. This is a ragtag gang from all over the world that I walked the last 2 weeks with in the Santiago one of the years out of Leon, Spain. My oldest daughter
Back in Glacier National Park, St. Mary's Lake.
There's the whole family, including Allison, my niece, and another friend of ours, Jackie. And they live on the Golden Gate Bridge. So the idea was, and as he explains it in the book, they came from the south. They flew out the day before, and I'm coming down the coast from the north. They flew out. They met me on the bridge at the halfway point, and which was like totally, it was storybook fairy tale type of thing. But in reality, they came the night before, and
We recreated it on the bridge. I even say in the book, look, how it didn't happen that way.
wait, let's just say that. This is in France, and that gang from all over the world. Once again, amazing people, and I still in touch with them all the time. But now, this is interesting. The year I finished France, I went back up over the Pyrenees to Pamplona, and then I took a train to Barcelona, spent 2 days there, and then flew home. I was done. But these people were starting in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port on the other side of the Pyrenees, where most people start to go across Spain. So I walked 3 days with them to Pamplona, and she was from Montana, she was from Florida, she worked at Disney World, she was the character, oh God, I can't think of it now. She played a character in Disney World, and she walked it the year before alone to decide whether she wanted to get married to Michael. And
During that walk, I said in the book, she said
yes to the dress. And
and they did get married, and then for the honeymoon, they walked in together.
I mean, it's just storybook stuff. I mean, I keep running into this all the time. So I walked with this gang
And a few other people.
and those last 3 days of my trip that year were just so fantastic to have a whole new gang.
And then when I left that,
Wanted to take the train to Barcelona. They kept going across, and then we stayed in touch by social media, and I watched as they went across and completed their walk. This is the Grand Canyon in the snow. This is my buddy, the Angel Gabriel. You will read about him, another bigger-than-life character. He lives in New York City now, but he's once again from Kutztown. And his dad was the philosophy, right, he was a professor at KU. Yeah, Boytas. Yeah, Boytas. Gabriel Boytas was the son's name, and he was the oldest son. Yeah. This is in central France. My friend, once again, from Australia, and I was a new friend, and she was actually from Barcelona. That's my buddy Chuck. He's from Tempton, and he was with on walk
across America, and
yeah, this was in Idaho, in one of the big rivers, the Clearwater, I think. Grand Canyon once again. Johnny Knapp, he's conversing with these birds.
Condor. A little more.
Not so much on my daughters that they come from the heart, but because Johnny's a little crazy, so I think he actually thinks that they're human. There's a whole gang of us in France with 2 new friends that we picked up along the way. Sylvie from France and Louis from France. So they could also, that was great because then they could translate for us. My friends from let's see, they were from Denmark, father and son, that's in Spain. My friend from Cuba, who I still keep in touch with, she's now a world traveler. She surfs the coast of Portugal, the big waves, the west coast of Australia, climbed up to some of the highest peaks in the Himalaya. Yeah, she's just this go-getter, like this complete energy. And I walked with her for a few days. That's a whole gang of Germans that I spent another year walking across to Santiago, and it rained a lot, but they were another bunch of partygoers that we had so much fun together. My friends from Tahoe, Tina and her husband Mike in Portugal, my friend Nini, always had this balloon tied to her back, and she must have looked like she weighed about 80 pounds. I was afraid her balloon was gonna
Picked her up and carried her away, but everyone called her a Kino angel.
Whenever you had a down day, you walked with Nini from Taiwan, and she picked your spirit up the minute you started walking with her. So she was a very valuable asset. And this is in Santiago, one of the alleyways that you see, and there's part of the cathedral there. Dave and Laura,
One was a lady from the Kino del
Norte from Boulder. This is another one of those vineyards in Spain, and you can see the snow-capped mountains over in the Cantabrians over that way. And this is the area where the wine comes from that I drink. That's
my favorite wine from
Rioja. Also, same thing, just a little closer to the mountains. Continuing, now we're starting to head out of Rioja. Yep, always cold and windy in those parts of northern Spain. This is in the city, this is also Burgos, I think. Friends from Boulder again. And our friend Shirley from Puerto Rico, we walked across some of the Meseta, the desert, together. But this is, you see those towns in the distance, you know you're heading that way. You think, oh good, the day's almost over, it's another mile, I'll be there. And then about 2 hours later, how comes it's not getting any closer? Yeah. Father and son, and that is in France. But one of the interior cathedrals, I think that might be in Leon. That's Astorga. And that's part of the mountains again. I think those might be the Asturian mountains. Typical cafe that you stop at any time, day or night. It seems they're open all the time. It's amazing. One of the windmills. You see windmills all over there, in all the mountains. Guy from Mexico, I walked with for a few days. There's the cross, Cruz de Ferro cross there. Yeah, that's it there, where you leave your burdens behind. And then you start walking down off the mountain. One of the worst of any I've ever done anywhere in the world. Really difficult path day of just going downhill and slipping and sliding. This is the last of the Knights Templar, he claims. It's Thomas. And he said they're all well, that was the 1200s. And anyway, he still does all the rituals and that, and yes, there's Alberta there. I wanted to sleep there and just spend the night around the campfire. One, there's a language barrier, so already it wasn't going to be great. He took me to this shed, and the beds were, you hit the bed and the dust.
Even after the volley, when I looked at the hole in the roof.
Yeah, that rain that
Night, my wife been sleeping outside, so I said,
he said he was getting it fixed, and I think I heard, that was about 2 years ago, I heard that he did,
get that fixed.
and
Yeah, and so if that's the case, I'll sleep there. This guy's not gonna be around.
around forever either. So maybe the next time is the time I will spend the evening with Tomas. That's the castle in Ponferrada.
Friends from England.
Japan and Germany. It's me on top of the biggest, the second biggest climb, other than the Pyrenees, at the other end of Spain. They call, and it's almost like a Celtic mountain, and yeah, so that's one I'm very happy I got up. And then just beyond there, Sobrero was the name of that mountain. And then walking a couple miles beyond that. Now this is Galicia, a place where the Celts came over by boat from Ireland, and this reminded them of their home because of the windswept, rocky cliffs along the Atlantic. This is the greenest part of Spain, this little corner in the northwest. And because it's green, it rains a lot, it's mystical, there's a lot of mist. That the Celts, and even now yet, the Irish who I walk with sometimes, they feel like they're back home when they're in Galicia.
Now, did their wives ask them why they're walking in Galicia if it's so much like Ireland?
They've done everything in Ireland.
Why are you walking in Pennsylvania? It's really nice to walk there. Yeah. I'm going to go somewhere different.
Yeah, and this is another part of that whole mystical, you look into the woods and you see crosses and markers and dolens, and yeah, it's pretty amazing. There, that's a good, that's right, there's a good represent, you see the path. Yeah, you do that for like most of the morning, it starts to clear up then later, but you get up early and you do the first couple hours like that, it's pretty wild. I'm about 2 days out from Santiago. This is the last time I was over. I was over there since after COVID. This happened like the year before COVID. So this was one of my last times, though I have been back since once. And now I'm almost about half a day's walk from Santiago. It's the typical dress. And there's my ending. So that would have been 2019, I think. And I think we're at the end. Is that it? That's it.
By any chance, did you meet other either type 1s or type 2s on your walk?
Very rarely, actually. Now, in America, because we were going to the Indian reservation,
Yeah, right.
most of them were type 2. Probably most of it was
America. Yeah, that was one of the few.
and in Europe, and plus sometimes maybe they don't want to always talk about, but I don't think there was a place, when I was in France one night around that I had to change my site, and a guy came over to me, he was German, and he said, my wife is type 1, and she says, oh, I can't go with you walking because I have my diabetes and I can't, do it. It's impossible for me to. So he took a picture of me changing my pumps. Now
She's gonna have to come across that poor woman, maybe she shouldn't be able to walk. But, yeah, I never heard back from her. I don't know what happened. Yeah. Went to a quick.
checks of my blood sugar. It's all easy to do now. You just hit a button on the phone and there it is. And that's right here. I got a little thing in my leg. That's a continuous glucose monitor. Charts it, pie charts it, graphs it, sends it to my endocrinologist, sends it to my diabetes educator, who happens to be my youngest daughter, works at Lehigh Valley Hospital, and she's in charge of technology there.
How did you meet all these friends? Just like walking?
Just walking.
And then...
Yep, they all have the same idea in mind, and
everyone's so graceful and grateful, and it just amazes me every year. Like, it doesn't get old. I keep thinking of eventually, when I left America, doing all of that, I walked across almost every state, except for Hawaii, Alaska. I didn't walk across. But then it was time to move on, and now that I do this is all I want to do. Yeah, in Europe, and the trails are all over the place. I've only scratched the surface.
You put a word out to all these friends, like, I'm doing this,
Yep.
You want to join me?
This is a big deal for me. I leave in a week and a half. and I fly into Toulouse, France, which is southern France. I haven't walked down that far yet. But it's a big deal because it's 50 years that I was diagnosed.
Oh.
So this is my big party, my moving party. I cut my mileage a little bit. All my different friends are joining me at different portions. Some new friends will be there, and I'm gonna walk to the Pyrenees, up and over the Pyrenees into Spain. And some of it will be the same stuff I've covered, some will be new. I've mixed it up. And I'm just not gonna be pushing myself. I'm getting close to, I'm a year and a half from 70, and it's getting harder. But at the same time, I can still do it. I just cut my mileage. I'm not proving anything to anybody, yeah. So, so I'm looking for the first guy to join with me. We're starting in Toulouse because I'm on a search for Black Madonnas.
Oh.
These are ancient works of art in some of the cathedrals all over Europe that were brought by the Knights Templar from Egypt and Ethiopia, from the Coptic Christians. And of course, coming from there, Mary is black, and sometimes she's holding baby Jesus, and he's black. And I'm going to search for them all over in these, some of the places I've been through before that I didn't realize they were in those cathedrals, you have to ask about. They may not be displayed. The Catholic Church hierarchy isn't real happy about Jesus being black. That's not, and it's not necessarily that the wood has gotten dirty over the years, because they're wooden usually. Now, where they aren't anymore, there are recreations in some churches, or there's art. There's a piece of art that the original, they'll paint the original. And so it's another obsession of mine now that I have, and I'm just gonna, I've gotten an anthropologist to join me, and an art historian. And I come from a spirituality background. And so we're gonna pool our knowledge and go on a search for them. And I'm likening it to Indiana Jones / Da Vinci Code.
Or you can say it's true, like the whole Indiana Jones
Da Vinci Code shit.
for that I'm not taking it that seriously.
But then again, and all these years, I used to break off from some of the tour groups in those castles and look around and then sneak behind the barrier. And they're going to go down into the torture chambers and the places where there's usually dirt on the floor. Kick around looking for the Holy Grail.
The art of the
Coming is pretty big. That's,
it's hard to
have that very, but who knows?
and with the Holy Grail and the whole thing is I always remember this.
Listen, when you watch Indiana Jones, don't look for something shiny. Jesus was a carpenter, and so was his dad. It's gonna be wood, the chalice. So you're not gonna see it quite as easy. It's not gonna shine. It's not gonna be silver or gold or something. Look for wooden. Well, I still haven't found it, but that's not important. It's the search and not the finding. So so that's where I'm going.
And that's what I'm looking for. And
I already know that there's one original in Toulouse. I have the address of the cathedral. The first 2 days I'm there, I'm walking all around the city. It's a city of about 100,000 people, so if you put Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton together as one city, it's about that size. So, but it's a very much a walking city too. It has a lot of path. So I'm just gonna go traipsing about, looking into all the cathedrals, asking about questions, and see if someone, all of a sudden I run into the right person who points me in the right direction and I find something. And that'll be part. I'm being joined by another character who has the potential. I've not walked with him yet. I've heard him on podcasts and he's heard me. That's how we met. He's from northern India, from Dharamsala, which is up near the Nepal border. And when he remembers when he was 5 years old, one of his first memories is a group of people coming from Tibet, when the Chinese invaded Tibet and Lhasa. They came over the border, and then the Dalai Lama was 15 at the time, and he met the Dalai Lama when he was 5. And the Dalai Lama was there and to set up this world headquarters, which it still is. He's at the Dalai Lama's hardly ever there. He's always traveling around the world, but so he knows that, and then he became a tanker boat captain, and for all his life he's now retired. He's 70, and he's traveled. He's been in every major port in the world several times over a long career. And I guess about 20 years ago, he pulled into a port in Sweden, met a woman 20 years 20 years younger, and got married, now lives in Sweden. He's coming to join me the first 2 weeks. And yeah, this guy is just a talker, and he's got stories. And probably his biggest thing, though, he's into classic rock. And he knows all the lyrics, all the band, the different incantations of the band, and he just goes on and on about this all the time. So I'm gonna, it's gonna be quite interesting. Then my friends from Boulder are coming, rookies from overlap there. They're coming, and they have a 3-year-old now. They're bringing a jogging stroller, and they're gonna push him, and he's gonna walk a little bit, get a little bit tired. They'll just bus ahead, and then I'll walk and meet them later in the day. So they're pretty adventuresome in that respect. So yes.
Well, you have 2 grandsons, aren't they walking?
Yes,
Yeah.
they're gonna come sometime. Not yet this one. The one he just turned 2 yesterday. The other one's 8. I take him around on adventures in town when he's with us, to the cemetery. I think I took him on an adventure once. He's sometimes hard. He's a big technology guy. Like, he codes already at 8 years old. He's trying to teach me, and it's not working. But his dad is a coder. His livelihood. So his dad taught him already. So he wants to be on the computer too much. So finally, I closed the computer and said, now we're going on an adventure, Miles. First place I'm going to take you is a mysterious place just a half a mile from here. There is a store that exists, and the man's name is Mr. Food. When you walk in there, as you walk in, he will hand you a hot dog. We call Brian. And then I said, we're going to take the hot dog, and we're going to cross the street, we're going to sit on a bench and eat it with Jesus. Statue of Jesus and Trinity. And that day was actually Good Friday. I brought a little can of red paint because I'm in charge of keeping it in order there, because Todd, the guy that carved it, had that bad accident when he fell off the roof and he was paralyzed on his right side. So I'm in charge of keeping the red places where his feet and hands had been pierced, Jesus, were starting to fade. So I opened the paint, and then I told him the whole story about the crucifixion and that, and I painted all the marks as he ate his hot dog. and then we went to the bookstore, where I said, there's a whole world here. He does read a lot of books. So he went in, I said, you can pick out a few books. That's the next part of the adventure. And then we went up into the cemetery behind St. John's. Oh, we did the labyrinth, wandering through Mysterious Labyrinths. That's the name of the book. But the labyrinth behind St. John in the cemetery, we did that. Told him the story about the bull that chased the original labyrinth in Greek mythology, and how the bull chased the man in there. And I said, you just keep your eyes open in case the bull starts. And then we went to the president, the statue of the guy with the bald head, way out, really, probably the highest statue in there. And sometimes the birds sit up there, sometimes they poop on his head. So I said, let's watch, maybe we can see if they. And then the last one is a new grave up there, and it's a woman who, she has 2 pictures of herself there she's drinking a Miller beer, and then the other one she's shooting her son from a wheelchair. Yeah. So I showed him that one, and he tried to explain, he said, what's that? It doesn't fit in with us. Well, it's just the way it is. I said, I don't know the people, I don't know the woman. I said, two things she liked to do when she was still alive is
Drink beer and shoot guns, hopefully not the same day. So, yes.
Can you explain over in Spain why they put those crosses up here now?
it's just everywhere. It's not only,
Do you know the reason why?
no, they're just,
Yeah, it's just, part of it, I think it's part Knights Templar once again, and
part of the trail, of the leading the trail, but it's really everywhere. Portugal, not as much. France, just as much.
Not maybe even on overdose.
Not, well, there are some
but when you come up to the street, there's a great
up there, and there is Charlemagne.
army.
Charlemagne wasn't part of that whole Templar thing.
Roland, the famous old Roland, he was
Attacked and killed there, and then he was leading his troops ahead. It's part of the mythology of it all. But there, his grave, Roland's grave is there. Yeah. I have a friend that's going to read first, an old high school
friend of mine, and
I said, choose a section, whatever you like, and read that one, and then we'll go from there. Give me a break, too.
We want our parents to find the joy in what we do, and I think in this section, Bob's dad finds the joy in what he's done. So, from Lewistown, we headed east again to Sellings Grove and Lewisburg, where we had a program at a hospital. As we rolled on toward the Andesite region, we now retraced part of the route I had walked 2 years before. Another development started to happen each morning during my mom's 5-mile portion. I was being covered by various news outlets, mostly newspapers, but also some local television stations. They usually showed up in the morning, and when they found out my 66-year-old mother was walking with me, they wanted to interview her too. She had a bit of a more sophisticated style and approach than my dad did during his evening stand-up. I had to chuckle to myself many times while walking alone about how my parents had become parts 2 and 3 in the 3-ring circus that was the Trans-Pennsylvania Ultra Walk for the Cure. We found ourselves traveling in some roughed-up places in the middle of nowhere through Schuylkill and Carbon counties on days 11 and 12. There was the hellish smoke of the underground mine fires of deserted Centralia and then Lost Creek, where half of the houses in town were partially burned down from different fires. For a few days now, my dad had started stopping at cemeteries and wandering among the tombstones. My mom was worried that he had a death wish, and when we confronted him about it, he said, "I'm just looking for material for my comedy act." "Why did you think that would be funny?" she asked. I didn't think the other stuff I've been saying was funny either. Great section.
I've kept 46 journals starting in the year that I graduated from high school.
also was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I started
And that's when I started doing all these journeys, and I ran, before this I actually ran ultra marathons. I ran, first of all, 20 marathons and 30 ultra marathons, culminating in a 6-day race, which I went around the track for 6 days and nights. In a race, whoever has the most miles wins. And it was the first diabetic, definitely in the US, possibly history, to complete a race like that. So I walked 274 miles in 6 days. With all that stuff, I was just keeping, everything was entered in there, and when I started to write the book, I did that, and I also had friends. I know Johnny Knapp brought me some of his journals, and Lynette Mertz had some journals, and my kids had kept them because that was part of their requirement to be with me, that you got to keep the journal. And yeah, so it was fairly easy to start to get all those memories to start flashing back. I have a pretty good memory to begin with on that stuff. Because my wife will say, yeah, I don't understand, you don't know what you ate for breakfast yesterday, but you can remember, like, in a certain day in the middle of nowhere in France, who you met that day. And
Yeah, I can't, it's just, this stuff is stuck in my brain, but day to day, yeah, it's not always I can remember stuff. Yeah. All right, Micah. He's gonna be reading a section here, and I'm not even sure what it's gonna be.
No, I hope I don't steal your thunder.
That's so easy.
This was not planned at all, but I reached out to Bob and said that, let me make sure they're page. Yeah, so I reached out to Bob after finishing the book and said, I feel like I just went on a pilgrimage after reading this. And so I wanted to just share one of the passages that that resonated with me and that I thought was great because Bob talks a lot about the kind of, there's a balance of this sacred component of pilgrimages and these cathedrals, going to mass and being with these nuns, and then also the getting to pubs in town, having a drink, and pushing your body through these physical challenges that are really not only physically but mentally grueling. And so you talked about the Masada, about walking through that, and it was an 8-day component, and I couldn't imagine walking through the same type of scenery for 8 days. But passage here is, over the next few days, we all ended up walking many days alone. It was not a conscious decision, but more like introduction into solitary experimentations, seeking and searching. We would occasionally run into each other for brief spells. I shared Sheila's headphones for a few minutes as she listened to Brazilian heavy metal music, but the unwritten rule was to let the Masada wash over us as imperfect souls struggling through life to see what we could become at the other end 8 days later. During my long, lonely solo walking, I found some strange things happening to me. I broke out in tears, not from the loneliness, but sometimes from thinking of the earthly lives of friends and family who had passed on into the next life. Other times, a feeling of mild homesickness arose, and sometimes there was no reason for the tears at all. However, I liked walking alone. I started to think of those Camino tropes, undeveloped in my mind, but talked and written about by long-term pilgrims, psychologists, anthropologists, and even quantum physicists. I went deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole during the ensuing years of walking pilgrimages. Thoughts in the early stages of my consciousness focused on how the ancient pilgrims walked at night using the Milky Way, the Via Lactea, to guide them. The stars in northern Spain, especially on mountaintops, were bright so the lines ran under the earth. Were bright to the point of feeling like they could drip on you. Powerful magnetic ley lines ran under the earth, a form of places of big medicine, like the Native American shamans had talked about. Thin places where the fabric between different worlds let one travel betwixt and between. The concept of liminality was like a threshold that, upon entering, takes you to the edge of things, through the doors of perception. I understood this entire walk was way bigger than me. Something was happening out there. It was palpable. I look forward to investigating and feeling these concepts further.
Yeah, good. Read about our wedding reception. Kutztown Grange Hall. I'm not a great fighter, but I can take a punch. I get knocked down and I get right back off the mat before the count hits 5. I've always been a fast healer, so I took a few punches, got back up, and healed my many wounds. But the biggest punch I took had come 3 years earlier, when I fell in love with Nancy Lee Miller. I was still fuzzy in the head and reeling when I came off the mat after taking that hit. We've been living together off and on for 2 years at this point in our story, but you can't live in sin forever. The time had come to make a commitment. We got married during an actual hurricane on October 9th, 1976. That hurricane spawned a round of tornadoes and torrential rainstorms. True love cannot be stopped by weather. To this day, after being together for 47 years, my wife says our life together has always been stormy. But I qualify that with, but it's never been boring. Our wedding ceremony was fairly common, except for the weather histrionics. We wrote our own vows. They were heartfelt, but not wildly creative. Because of the foul weather, we could not take outdoor photos. The wedding reception, however, was a party for the ages. Both of us and all our friends and relatives knew how to celebrate and have a rousing good time. The weather once again played a role, though this time in the positive. Months before the wedding, we began receiving responses to the invitations. 100 guests were sorry they couldn't attend, because the Topton Halloween parade was being held the same night. Their kids were in various school marching bands, they were driving fire trucks or on organizational floats. But the hurricane caused the parade to be postponed. With an extra 100 guests now suddenly attending, the ranks of partygoers swelled to 600. How do you pull that off financially? It was $2 a person. Luckily, the venue was big and had 2 floors. With a dance floor upstairs where 3 buddies of ours and a band called Trey performed raucous rock and roll tunes at full volume. It was hard to believe that guitar, organ, and drums could make that much noise. Even though the downstairs was where you could eat, drink, and talk, the music and dancing penetrated the ceiling, causing the lights to dim and sway. There was a no alcohol policy on the upper floor, but people had flasks and pine bottles in their pockets, so there was nowhere you could escape the imbibing or inebriation. The polished wooden floors soon swarmed in sweat, thanks to the jungle-like humidity the hurricane had left in its wake. The wild dancing almost caused injuries, especially during the limbo. Outside, the shrubbery alongside the building was baptized by volumes of vomit spewed by old high school classmates and my brother Scott. And wait, how old were you then?
18.
Yeah. Who had consumed way too much champagne. Later, he crashed a few steps up the staircase where he lay for the rest of the party, a goofy smile permanently plastered on his face. The party was supposed to end at midnight, but my father-in-law pulled a few strings with his fellow Grange Hall buddies. Trey kept up a relentless driving rhythm, and the dancing reached a fevered pitch. Dancers started singing along, slurring the words to songs they could barely remember in their drunken, sweat-soaked state of mind. At 2 in the morning, it started winding down. Drunks, including my middle brother, were carried to cars, driven home, and thrown on the front lawns, which is naturally true. Others stumbled to their cars where they slept until the sun crept over the roof. The members of Trey packed up their instruments and upon waking the next day, found they had lost 10 pounds each. Nancy and I drove to a motel honeymoon suite where we immediately fell into a deep slumber. The consummation had happened years ago. In '96, sometime after that, I went on my first trip out west. Me and my wife and my cousin Mike, who was my best man, Mike Reinhardt. And and this was a little lead up to that, and then there's just a little story. I consider the line coming up here as one of my favorite lines that I've ever written. I'd asked Miles to be my best man in my wedding, mainly because of the adventures we had taken together, including a couple of 3-day excursions on the Appalachian Trail, heading west toward Harrisburg and east toward Jersey. One December, we froze through the night in Kirkridge Shelter, 7 miles from the Delaware Water Gap. Every time we fell asleep, we would wake up thinking that hours had passed and that it would soon be morning when we could warm up by hiking fast. We would soon realize only 10 minutes had passed. This happened all through the night. After that test, the fact that he wanted to keep backpacking with me meant that he was the one who earned the best man title. Now, here we were among the high peaks of the West, for which we had trained together through the Pennsylvania heat and humidity, running bleachers at the soccer field with packs on, climbing to the pinnacle, running up the mountain to the Port Clinton Fire Tower, then continuing up the 250 steps to the top. We ate rusty nails for breakfast and shit out digested specks of metal. By August, my buddy and I were ready for the Colorado Alpine summits. That's my favorite line I ever wrote. We ate rusty nails for breakfast and shit out digested specks of metal. Yeah, so we ended up climbing 3 14,000-foot peaks, and Nancy joined us on parts of them, but my cousin Debbie, who was also a sister of Mike, was living out there on the Colorado-Utah line for a couple of years, married to a Miller guy, and they Nancy hung out with them some of those days when me and Mike went up, because it would sometimes take most of the day to get to the top of the peak and get back down. So, yes. And I also had read about a lot of stuff about my boyhood woods growing up 5 miles south of here, up on the ridge here in Rockland Township. Here's just a short one. There's a whole bunch of these different things that happened to me out there in those woods that made me realize that I was receiving a calling. I was supposed to do these walks. I can't explain it. I was 14 to 16 when all these visions came. My mom thought I was crazy, and but it's around this time I noticed a red light on a distant hill 5 miles east of my house. At night, I would go out in the front yard and gaze at this flashing beacon that called to me. Though it was a television transmission tower and the red light a warning for low-flying planes, for me it acted as the alchemical process that began to lead me somewhere else. One day I put on my pack and followed a power line in that direction. It was May and the noonday sun was heating things up. I scrambled for an hour and a half, mostly uphill through high grass and thorn bushes. I came out into a clearing, and there before me stood the tower. I immediately got goosebumps all over my body. The process was working. Something was important was happening. It was another step of many that took me into the wider world. And then I'm going to jump ahead to the walk across America, and it was that day at the big powwow. You saw a slide of that. Johnny was with me, as was his son Justin, and our 2 friends from Oregon. In central Washington, I walked to Lake Chelan, the site of the big gathering of northern tribes for a powwow that Dan had invited us to during our drive west. Skip and Kelly also went off route to attend the powwow. They had no idea what they were getting into. The festival grounds were packed with native dancers and spectators from far away as northern Canada. Many bands accompanied the dancers. The viewing bleachers were packed, as were the campgrounds. It felt like a native Woodstock. I usually do not get nervous about speaking in front of crowds, and I had 20 miles of walking under my belt for the day, which always inspires me instead of tiring me. But this was the biggest crowd I had ever addressed. Between a round of dancers, Dan brought me up to the microphone. I did my usual message of biography, storytelling, and inspiration, which lasts about 10 minutes. After I spoke, Dan announced that he and his new friend were going to dance. Now I'm nervous. Dan was one of the best dancers competing. I tried my best to put some spirit into it and mostly tried to mimic Dan. John laughed from the bleachers until Dan called him up to dance. Then Skip, Kelly, and Justin laughed until Dan called them up to dance. Now there were 5 white people dancing badly, with one of the best in the Pacific Northwest. Then the bleachers emptied, and the football field filled with movement as the drummers turned up the volume. It was truly one of the highlights of my life. As the inspiration level reached its peak, everyone in the field formed a line and personally shook my hand or gave me a hug. It took over an hour. I wished I could have heard every story of every person, especially the tribal elders. My gang of 5 fellow travelers was so full of revelation that we had trouble sleeping that night. This wonderful encounter would remain in my heart and carry me across the rest of Washington and on into northern Idaho. And then we'll do North Dakota, the second year of the Walk Across America. One day on the Great Plains, I was chugging along in one of my trademark bouts of flow when I heard a familiar horn blowing, followed by manic laughter. My vehicle was passing, headed to our last rendezvous meetup for the day. But what was crazy was that the vehicle was being driven by my daughter. She was finally getting her wish to drive, albeit about 9 months earlier than legally allowed. They had noticed young farm boys driving pickup trucks many times, even one where the pedals had blocks on them and a Sears catalog on the seat. Adrian didn't need that, but she also could not make the claim that she needed to drive for a farm. She was enthralled driving the very Mini Winnie through the American flatlands. Yes, indeed, my little girl was growing up fast. Hopefully her mother would not find out about this. Emma was an enigma. This was another friend that I had, two friends besides Adrian. Emma was another, she was the same age as Adrian, about 15. Emma was an enigma. We tried to figure her out, but she constantly changed her emotional colors. Emma also had nomadic tendencies, which always makes it hard to fit in with families during downtime. I was very empathetic with her there. With this crew, there was no problem fitting in. All my crew members were travelers, and most had plenty of quirks that made them interesting. But Emma took unique and idiosyncratic to another level. I marked her meditations on the passing scene in my journals with the symbol E=mc², short for Emmacisms. At times they had an Einstein quality to them. Other times they seemed prophetic. And a few times she blurted out something we still haven't figured out. She also had a vivid imagination and used it to illuminate any situation. When we camped at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, we all noticed that one of the rangers took a liking to Emma. It was obvious, but in Emma's mind, growing from a large repertoire of slasher movies that she loved, he was an axe murderer who would stealthily attack us during the night to steal Emma away. Later, she invented him in her mind as an alien. One night, Emma sat at the far end of a pier along Lake Oahe, totally at peace, smoking one of her stash of cigars. The lighted end, the only light in the darkness, blowing barely seen smoke rings into the air. She was only 15. One day she revealed to us a horribly mangled, twisted, swollen second toe of her left foot. We laughed for 10 minutes, not at the foot per se, but at the thought that Emma found it hilarious. Emma also made a prediction while riding the elevated train through the rows of cars in the O'Hare Airport lot, that in the future we would shop and pick out cars this way. On our last moments in Roosevelt National Park, as we prepared to leave after a long group hike, Emma was out on a promontory that featured a stunning view of buttes, mazes, and the Little Missouri River. She danced like nobody was watching, her headphones blasting Debbie Harry and Blondie. We signaled to her that we were ready to move on. And then we took notice. Somebody was watching. We noticed the creepy ranger observing Emma hidden behind a pinyon pine tree. The axe murderer watched with glee as Emma danced the dance of life, grooving to the metaphysical rhythms of the universe, until we halted her reverie and rescued her safely back into the motorhome. Tina was one of those rare breeds of humans who always seemed to be on a natural high, always ready for adventure, someone who never seemed to have an off switch, except on long flights when she charged her batteries by sleeping from takeoff to landing. She was our crew's drill sergeant who kept our ragtag group of bohemians moving forward. At the same time, she could get down into the world of the two teenagers, thereby gaining their confidence, thus able to be relatable. Tina loved challenges and dove into them feet first, just like she did when she jumped into the Missouri River from a steel bridge. Another example of Tina's take-on life happened when we encountered a monster bull bison as we rounded a curve during a hike in the Badlands. My heart was still thumping minutes after he charged off into the brush, but Tina, looking thrilled but unfazed, merely stated, "That was cool, way cool." All of the crew who accompanied me on my quest would become lifelong friends. The experience we shared, though short in time, seemed long because of their intensity. Those experiences coalesced into one wild adventure, even in the most mundane of landscapes. These were essential ingredients on a long walk across the breadth of a continent. My walkmates gave me an energy I could not always find in myself, one that stayed with me when I was alone. As Tina would say, "That's cool, way cool." We entered Minot, North Dakota, at the end of a long day of walking through the flatlands. Tomorrow, the old guard girls would exit, and the new guard girls would arrive, trading one traveling circus for another. That morning, during Adrian's segment of the walk, we discussed the ritual of coming and going. We were learning not to concentrate on our nearing separation, but instead on her reunion with those she missed back home. It would always be hard to miss the energy of the walk across America for diabetes. She had to learn, as I did, to find that energy in everything back home, to treat every part of life as if she was still out here. And then in no time, the next year, we would return. Fathers can only hope to have some small positive influence on their offspring, or shared journeys in the wildlands since she was 8 years old were set against our longer journeys through life. They were all part of life's rich pageant. Okay, so I have 2 or 3 things marked here. Where are we time-wise?
Three Bob.
Keep going. Alrighty. So now we jump ahead to, this is, oh yeah, we gotta read this one. This one's Marion's in this one.
Don't you dare. No, Bob, don't do it.
My friend Marion flew into Tucson and prepared herself for life on the road, this being her first appearance during Adventure on the Rim of America. She was a diabetes educator, working at one time for hospitals and recently for the County of Berk's Health Department. Her most valuable skill was her deeply caring attitude to her coworkers, patients, neighbors, and people at her church. Even though this was Marion's first time on the rim, she always swirled around other aspects of it, with contributions, helping me present at conferences and for various church groups, and checking in to hear how things were with the adventure and personally with my diabetes. She was like the godfather in how she had influence and connections, only she had a high degree of empathy and compassion. Marion also had a wicked sense of humor backed by a pervasive laugh. She would feel right at home on the road in southern Arizona and New Mexico. Our first stop was at the San Xavier del Bac Mission, a school nuns ran for children of the Tohono O'odham Nation. We spent 2 days there, and the funniest incident for me was watching Marion try to maneuver the puppets by herself, generally a 2-person job, only hours after arriving in Arizona. Most of the kids just laughed, thinking that Marion's jet-lagged attempt to control the puppets to be part of the act. She agreed that even if you would know in advance that you would be asked to work puppets, how could you even prepare? On the next 2 nights, we stayed in next we headed due south to Soñada, Oaxaca City, and the 6-shooter gunfights in the streets of Tombstone, where a walk around the cemetery revealed stones of famous outlaws and sheriffs. I wasn't fearful, because Marion, packing heat and gunslinger reflexes, was both by my side. I now knew why I chose her for this section. Continuing east, we encountered wild Apache landscapes while walking toward the copper mines of Bisbee and the Pedregosa Mountains, very close to the Mexican border once more. Bisbee is known for having over 1,000 steps spread out on the hilly periphery of the immense mines. I spent an entire afternoon climbing and descending every single step. 6 weeks into this year's adventure, I was achieving peak fitness with my blood glucose readings in excellent range, other than the usual expected or high or low deviation, which is quickly corrected. Marion understood all this way more than any other member of my team. Next up was a walk through the Coronado National Forest, which along with Chiricahua National Monument was a totally different environment with stunted pine trees, pine needle trails, and moonscape rock formations rising up 40 feet. I was not prepared for all that after all that desert. Both Mary and I were jazzed up from viewing it at a walker's pace. We had to drive north to present a program at a hospital in Silver City, New Mexico, right on the Continental Divide. The gorgeous small city sits at 7,000 feet with mountains and a robin's egg blue sky that was so brilliant it hurt your eyes. This was another one of those places I collected on my route as future landscapes to settle down in. The hospital was state-of-the-art, and the downtown was hip, with bike shops, bakeries, and coffee houses. It was a supply stop for the Continental Divide Trail. The programs went well, and I was invited back to be part of a conference right about when I would return here next year. We hiked on the CDT north towards the frontier of the rugged Gila wilderness. Then it was on to La Cruces, Mexico, and down into El Paso, Texas. I wasn't done with New Mexico yet, though I needed to do the last driver exchange of the year at the airport. Marion's stint had reached an end. After brightening up my walk for the last week, she would now do the same back home. Brightening up the lives of everyone she came into contact with was Marion's modus operandi. Once again, this is one of my favorite parts. That night along a lonely campfire was Dave's night for storytelling and regaling me with his wisdom. Normally he was a man of few words. He was used to the quiet of the alpine world, high up on the western rock wall where the closest human would be over 100 feet above or below, leading or belaying. But I'd heard rumors that at the base of those big walls around campfires, Dave was quite talkative. Rumor also had it that it may have something to do with a few drinks, as climbers can sometimes indulge to calm their nerves from exposure. Or it might be just how a campfire brings forth stories from even the quietest of adventurers. That night in Azatite, we had no alcohol, so my guess is that was the campfire. Two of the many platitudes Dave brought forth that night still stick in our heads years later. First, he commented on the dangers of hanging out too much with women friends. To this he warned, laughing with another woman in public is the worst form of infidelity. His second pronouncement had to do with how much I was really into maps all my life, worshiping them like the Dead Sea Scrolls. At home, if I couldn't sleep at night, I would slip down the stairs where I would get out my stash of maps, lay them out on the kitchen table, and start to plan a future adventure. My wife would sneak down the steps and try to catch me in the act of tracing my finger on the coral body of the landscapes, imagining the wetness of the rivers, of the contours of the mountains. But I was prepared. I had an old Playboy magazine my father-in-law had given me. So if I heard a step creak, I would quickly stash the map into the Playboy. My wife would say, "Aha, I caught you," but then see that I was just looking at a Playboy magazine. To this scenario, Dave exclaimed, quote, "Maps are the new pornography." And so then I have one more, and this will jump ahead to Europe. And, it's a Joan of Arc story. This is another one of my favorite parts, writing it. So we saw in central France some of those statues, and so put yourself back into that scenario. It was around this time that I noticed two things simultaneously. In most of the churches of any size, even in some of the small villages, there would be a prominent statue of Jeanne d'Arc. That's the French way of saying it, but I sort of go back and forth. Displayed near the front, she would be clad in armor, sometimes wounded, blood dripping, her sword or spear also dripping blood. I became quite infatuated, remembering the many books and movies I had consumed over the years concerning Joan of Arc, even one written by Mark Twain. She now edged ahead of the Black Madonna as my new obsession. Around the same time, I started noticing a young French girl walking at my pace, but always a half kilometer or so behind me. I would stop to catch my breath after a climb, turn around, and there behind me on a distant hill she would be gliding effortlessly, the optical illusion of mist surrounding her. This happened off and on for days. I began to think I was inventing her, or that maybe she was the ghost of Joan of Arc. She wore a floppy hat that could have been a helmet of armor. Finally, in a cathedral in Loch Abane, as I was telling Jenny from Australia about this strange continual sighting, the girl showed up at the Mass. It was only the three of us and one priest. I gazed at the statue at the front of the church and then to the back of the church, where the French girl was sitting, and was amazed by the resemblance. I even got down-to-earth Australian outback Jenny to admit that something weird was definitely happening. As part of this service, the priest recreated the act of Jesus washing the disciples' feet by washing our feet, including the feet of the maybe ghost of Joan of Arc. As we left the church, Jenny rushed ahead to try and engage in conversation with the French girl. I was anxious that Jenny would break the spell, but the girl's two-word reply was, "No Inglés," said with a shrug of her shoulders. But even that was done with an air of timely importance, history about to be made, battles to be marched to, the providence of God surrounding her. Then she put on her flappy hat helmet and proceeded to vanish into the meadows of Lac Bain. I saw her again the next day at the distant hilltop village of Lazière, her hand to her forehead to shield her eyes from the setting sun as she gazed ahead, looking for the battlements of the 100 Years' War. A day later, she appeared in the Gothic Cathedral of Moissac, and the next day across the River Lot, high on the escarpment of the storybook city of Aviar. Then she vanished again, this time never to be seen again. I did, however, continue to see the magnifique statues in all the churches I entered across the rest of France. I was still following the ghost of Joan of Arc. And that's it.